Today I'm going to talk about how to harmonize with the Native American flute. I'm not talking about the kind of thing you do at a flute circle where maybe one person plays a melody and then you play a counter melody or play some kind of an alternate melody, slower, higher, but it's more of a complementary melody than it is a harmony. I'm talking about harmonizing note for note like two singers might do in a duet or a duo. So, what I've done here is I've created two sampled flutes and put in some MIDI notes to trigger. And I've done this because I think it's easier to explain this with a graphical representation rather than trying to just show you on the flute and try to explain about intervals. I can actually show you the intervals. So I've got working in the key of E minor, and we've got E, G, A, B, D, E, which are the notes of the minor pentatonic scale. And I've got the same scale on both flutes, and they're laying right on top of each other. So what we're going to do here is we're going to make the second flute play higher, and it's going to be based on one open hole above, or the next note up in the scale, either way you want to call it. But so since we're going to do that, we're going to start this offset on the time code so that the second note is played at the same time as the first note. And because we're playing a G above the E here, we're going to do the same thing here. So I'm just going to take this note and move it up here. So we have now the same changes in the intervals, and let's see how that works out here. And actually, by offsetting, it's not quite the same, but we'll get into that as we go through it. So let's hear the first one. Oops, I've got to unlock this. Now we can hear both of them. That one sounds good. Let's try the second one. That one don't sound so good. So if you were to raise up the second hole, when the melody player raises the first hole, it's not going to sound so sweet. It's kind of like not good. Let's hear this one. That also is not good. That one's great. That one's good. And that one's good. So let's see what happens here. We don't want to go down because that's closer to the same notes, which would create kind of a sour dissonance. I think dissonance wouldn't be a strong enough word. Not real pleasant to the ears. So let's go a half step up and hear that. Okay, so what we've actually done then is what was a whole step, we changed it to a step and a half, which is what the interval is here. Let's listen to this one again. That's off, and we know not to go down, so we'll go up a half. Now let's hear it. That sounds good. And what we've done here, this one's gone one whole step. Now we're one whole step here, where before it was a half step. So now we're going a whole step here, and that's a whole step there, and I bet it sounds good. Yeah, it sure does. Let's hear this one. That one doesn't sound right. Listen to that. Kind of a clashing, but if you look, there's a step and a half here, and so this is a step, so let's make it a step and a half to match. Now let's hear it. Sounds good. And now we've got a whole step, and this one's a whole step. It should sound good. So we can play up through there. Okay, so the moral of this story here is that if you're going to play the next hole up, you're going to have to think in terms of making an adjustment If you're using an E minor flute playing with another E minor flute, you're going to have to make adjustments and do cross fingering to get the half steps that you need to make it line up. So think in terms of what's the interval on the melody flute, match that interval, and you've got a nice sounding harmony. But the thing that's also true, I just want to show you this. If you have made all these adjustments and you drop this down, and I just highlighted everything. That's not what I need to do. So let's try this again. Now if I drop this down, look at that, it's an E minor scale. So what that means is if you take the E minor scale and raise it up to where the starting note is G, it's going to work perfectly. So that means all you have to do if you want to harmonize with somebody playing an E minor flute is get your G minor flute, and it'll line up perfectly. Okay, so let's hear that just to make sure. Oops, I got to unlock them again. Here we go. So that's great. So you've got two ways you can go. You can make adjustments. If you've only got a flute in the same key, make adjustments by doing those half steps up when needed. And there's just a few of them in there, a couple of them I think it was. I can't remember how many there was now, but there's only a couple of adjustments that have to be made. If you have the benefit of having a flute that is starting on the same note as the second note on the melody flute, then that's the easy way to do it. So that's kind of without music theory. The thing to keep in mind in all of this is that intervals is it's the very core and fabric of music. All your chords, all your scales, all of that, the modes, everything is based on intervals. And so if you're looking at any scale or any chord, think in terms of intervals. And number one thing that does for you is if you're playing maybe on a piano or a guitar, if you're playing a G minor scale, it's simple to go to A minor. You just use the same intervals and start on A. The flute's the same way. You just maintain those intervals, and you can play any scale you want to. You can literally play any scale you want to on the flute, but there's a limit on the top end and a limit on the bottom end. That's why you have to, that's a perfect excuse for buying more flutes, because then you've got the other keys without running out of notes on the top end all the time. That's just my 2 cents worth. So I hope this has been helpful, and maybe if you're a newbie, maybe it's new information. If you're an experienced player, it might just be a new perspective on what you already knew. Or maybe you've been doing it and just didn't know what you were doing. I mean, I played guitar by ear for decades before I started learning anything about music theory. And all of a sudden I started knowing what I was doing instead of just doing it. It was kind of an eye-opener. So anyway, the intent here is not to set myself up as a flute instructor, but just to offer some suggestions and some insight into, the songwriting process. If you're in a place where you want a harmonizing flute, or maybe you're in a flute circle and you want to harmonize, here's an approach to it. So I hope, again, you found this useful, and I thank you for taking time to listen.